Good afternoon, and welcome to today's installment of the 2023 January series. I am Kyle Behe. I am a junior from Byron Center, Michigan, studying with the Ready for Life program on campus. Would you please take a moment to silence all electronic devices, including your cell phones, as you are doing so? I would like to welcome guests at all of our remote viewing locations, including Anna Maria, Florida, Mesa, Arizona, and St. Joseph, Michigan, and all of our virtual attendees across time zones. We are grateful you are joining us today. And now, would you please join me in a word of prayer? Dear God, we thank you for this day that you've given us. We pray that today's January series will speak to everyone's hearts. Thank you for the opportunity we have to gather together and learn. We thank you for the freedom that we get to live in because of your Son Jesus. And we all said, Amen. And now, Kevin Timpey, professor of philosophy, will introduce our guest.
I had the opportunity this past semester to teach a new course here at the university on disability, community, and advocacy. One of the texts that we read in that course was Amy Kinney's "My Body is Not a Prayer Request, Disability Justice in the Church." In the preface, Kinney describes her book as a call to action. It reminds me in certain ways of a number of the minor prophets, both a call to repentance and a promise of restoration. Unlike many other Christian authors writing on issues about disability in the church, Kinney is frank and direct in calling out the Christian community for its ableism, for its complacency, for its failing to live up to the values that it professes. But it is also a reminder of God's faithfulness, showing us what, with God's grace, we can become: a community committed to both love and to justice. Amy will be available to greet the audience in the west lobby of the Covenant Fine Arts Center following her presentation, where other copies of her book are available. And Calvin University is grateful to a friend of the January series for underwriting today's presentation. Please join me in welcoming Amy Kinney.
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hosting me here. It's a delight to be with you. I'll start just with a quick image description for access. I'm a disabled white woman in my 30s with shoulder-length, straight, blondish hair. I'm wearing a black dress with colorful lightning bolts on it, so you know that I'm fun. And I'm sitting in my black and blue mobility scooter named Diana, Princess of the Mascoutra, named after Wonder Woman, complete with bedazzled Wonder Woman W on the front. No, it's not for Weezer, as I am sometimes asked. You might have noticed that I'm physically disabled. I say disabled, or what we call identity-first language, to describe myself, really just to reclaim the word, and that I'm not ashamed to be disabled. Some folks use person-first language, such as people with disabilities or person who lives with a disability. It's not my roommate, so I say I am disabled. And there are, of course, other ways to describe disability: special needs, differently abled, or my personal favorite, handy-capable. all of which feel like euphemisms, like you're afraid to say the word. I'm not ashamed of my disabled body, so there's no need for whispers or euphemisms. My needs aren't special, they're just human. I'm disabled, unapologetically, unashamed to be disabled. And I start there because usually when people meet me, they reveal the ways that my disabled body makes them uncomfortable. Strangers and soon-to-be strangers approach me at the library, in parking lots and at the grocery store, with potions and prayers to make me not disabled, trying to fix what is not broken, giving me advice no one asked for. I've received everything from put garlic in your socks, to try to relax, to hit your leg with a hammer. To get rid of my disability, somehow I'm still disabled. When people meet me, they want to comment on my disability. And usually this takes about 2 minutes. 2 minutes of time where folks have to share with me how uncomfortable my body makes them feel. Now, people are well-meaning, and I think this comes from a good place, but over time, patterns emerge with the way that people engage with me about my disabled body. And so for our time together today, I'm going to share my top 5 taglines, I call them, that strangers say to me about being disabled. And I have a story for each of them. So here are the top 5 taglines that strangers say to me. 5, you'd be healed if you just believe. Yeah, thanks. 4, I don't even think of you as disabled. Thank you. 3, you're such an inspiration. 2, you'll be healed in heaven. And 1, I'd rather die than be disabled. Cringe. So I've got a story for each, so you can kind of time how long we've been together by which number I'm on, if you find one story boring, and come back in at a different time. So, number 5. 5th most popular tagline people say to me about being disabled: you'll be healed if you just believe. God told me to pray for you, she says. Her words linger like a cloying perfume in a claustrophobic space. God wants to heal you. She is undoubtedly thrilled with herself. I've been here before. It never ends well. This woman does not know me. She doesn't have the intimacy that prayer or accountability or sarcasm require. She simply interprets my disabled body as something that requires fixing and ropes God into her ableism. Internally, I make a swift calculation: endure the prayer to avoid squabble, or call her out on her benevolent eugenics and be branded a heretic again. I used to play the game, eavesdropping as they prayed for my broken body, concealing my spasms lest they be confused for demonic convulsions. I thought, if I could just assume a veneer of piety, it would inoculate me against their patronizing prayers and invasive interrogations. I believed I could perfect my way out of people demeaning disability, that somehow my patience would endow me with enough worth in their minds to be considered fully human. Spoiler, it didn't. All it did was put me on a carousel of dehumanization that made me feel complicit in their toxic theology. So I choose to be. I don't need prayer for healing. My body has already been sanctified and redeemed. I choke out. I know it won't be enough, but my dignity is not up for debate, especially here in God's house. Only a second has passed, but there is a lifetime between us. Bewildered, she blocks my path, grabbing my forearm so I can't leave until I suffer her pontification. You need to hear that God wants to heal you. You would be healed if you just believe. If you stopped resisting, you would be free already. Free. All I want to be free from is her. All I need to be liberated from is the notion that disability is inherently deviant and in need of eradication. I am the embodiment of her worst-case scenario because I don't need her to rescue me. I am what every athlete fears, and what pregnant parents dread. I am the catalyst for losing faith and questioning God. Theodicy runs through my veins. I am every villain in every superhero movie ever made. People call my murderers merciful because I am a burden and a drain and a waste. I am disabled. Or at least that's what they tell me. I've heard some version of this story my whole life. If it's not from well-meaning, prayerful perpetrators, it's from movies or teachers or doctors. But the worst of it comes from the church. It's no wonder that many of our churches have absorbed this core spiritual lie known as ableism, discrimination against disabled folks, when the landmark legislation that provided civil rights for disabled people in the United States is something that some Christian communities fought against. Alongside chanting, "Come just as you are," and blasting WWJD on every bracelet, mug, and t-shirt, remember those days? Many Christian spaces fought to exclude disabled people. When the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was signed into law in 1990, it excluded religious communities after some Christian leaders lobbied for restrictions. Now, the ADA is not all it's cracked up to be. I've visited bookstores where there's no disability parking, supermarkets where my mobility scooter can't fit through the aisles, and restaurants without accessible restrooms. Even the law allows for exceptions based on the historical significance of a building, as if architecture is more important than inclusion. Or where the so-called accessible entrance is round the back by the dumpster, where only rats are roommates. It does something to you for this to be the only way people will allow for you to participate, like you're too much of an embarrassment to enter through the front door. So the ADA doesn't solve everything, but for all its flaws and lack of enforcement, the ADA was a huge win for the disability community, outside of the church, that is. The law that finally granted accessible restrooms, curb cuts, and ramps in public spaces was condemned by some Christian churches and schools as imposing burdensome costs and needless injury to religious exercise. The message was clear. We are simply not worth the cost. Money was more important than disabled people. Camel, meet eye of needle. Evidently, our very presence diminished the ability for others to worship. Even today, churches are not legally required to follow the ADA. The erasure of disability in church spaces was deliberately manufactured because disabled people were, and still are, considered too pricey and profane to include. Knowing that houses of worship argued that including my body is offensive to their religious liberty will always sting. Knowing that this is still the law today cuts deeper. Pricey and profane sounds like a cool band name, though. In many modern churches, you can attend a Sunday service without ever interacting with a disabled person, let alone a disabled leader. Disabled people are 26% of the US population and 15% of the global population, and yet we are often nowhere to be found in church life and leadership. And think with me for a second on your life. How many pastors have you had speak into your life? How many elders, deacons, church leaders? How many of them were disabled? It's true we don't always know, because some disabilities are non-apparent, but I'm willing to bet that in your life, as in mine, the number was not 26%. The truth is, I'm not sure I've ever had a pastor that looks like me, moves like me, worships like me, experiences the world like me. And what a loss, because we are missing out on the prophetic witness of disabled people in our churches. Throughout Scripture, we encounter disabled people at the forefront of the work that God chooses to do with humanity. Jacob, Isaac, Moses, Paul, Timothy, Zacchaeus, and who can forget about Mephibosheth? We disabled folks bear the prophetic witness about what it is to be human. If only the church would listen to us. The non-disabled person cannot say to the disabled person, I have no need of you. How preposterous would that be? We cannot keep treating disabled people as disposable. Every time I think of this, I think of Matthew 25 from the ASV, Amy Standard Version, where Jesus says, "Depart from me, for I used a wheelchair and you gave me no ramp. I needed an accessible bathroom and you said it was too expensive. I asked you not to insult me by saying lame and you laughed at me. I just wanted to be included and you said it made you uncomfortable. Whatever you did for disabled people, you did for me." So number 4, fourth most popular tagline, strangers say to me about being disabled. I don't even think of you as disabled. I've lost count the number of times I've been accused of faking my disability. Suspicious strangers wearing a sly smile chide me, "You're too young to be disabled. It's a wheelchair, not whiskey. Stop using your grandpa's placard. My grandpa's dead, and he's never been to America." Or my personal favorite, "You can't be disabled with a smile like that." No amount of smiling has ever made my legs work differently. So I'm determined to make my trip to the DMV to renew my disabled license plates go as smoothly as possible. Unfortunately, the exasperated employee on the other side of the desk didn't get that memo. "If you were really disabled, you wouldn't be able to drive," the DMV employee scolds me through pursed lips. Disbelief radiating over her dark-brimmed glasses, she asks so many questions it puts toddlers to shame. "Where is Form 195? Where's your certification of disability? Why do you need a disabled plate?" she quizzes, a little too loudly, making heads turn. 10 minutes later, I have produced all the forms certifying that I am in fact disabled and not just using a cane for kicks. There's nothing left for her to do but humiliate me. She won't issue my disabled plates until I pass her arbitrary test of removing my current license plates. "If you tried hard enough," she scoffs, "you'd be able to." Blink, 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 I count in my head, unsure how to respond, trying to blink away my irritation. It's like we're reenacting that sloth scene from Zootopia, except there isn't a punchline at the end. A slender stranger, wearing more tattoos than skin, approaches what is now becoming a scene. "Can I change your plates for you?" he offers, compassion beaming from his chestnut eyes. My new friend is fresh out of prison. He knows what it's like to be dismissed by the system and wants to support a fellow outcast, he spills as he unscrews my plates. And it's there, in the DMV parking lot on top of crumbling cement, that I am met with more accommodations than I have been in most churches. Jesus showed up in the form of an eavesdropping ex-felon that day. Jesus is always showing up for me like that. I just wish Jesus would hang out at church more often. Amen. Maybe then my disabled body could belong. It's not just snarky DMV employees with endless paperwork asking me to prove that I am worthy of disability accommodations. It's the persistent patrolling of my life from complete strangers. I've been denied disability parking, educational accommodations, and fair housing. I've been scolded for parking in my own disabled parking space. I've been ordered to ask permission before bringing my wheelchair to my workplace. I've been yelled at for requesting accommodations that were signed into law 30 years ago. I've been mocked and cussed out by complete strangers accusing me of faking. People tell me on repeat, "I don't even think of you as disabled," as if it's a compliment. Most people assume that because they have never heard of my disability, it can't be that serious. Whatever they are going through ranks worse. We're not competing for care, for understanding, for love. It's not oppression Olympics, yet somehow they medal anyway. Turns out not much has changed in the past 2,000 years when it comes to disability doubters. When Thomas learns of Jesus' post-resurrection appearance, He questions the women and disciples' account until he sees Jesus for himself. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in his side, I will not believe, he chimes in, potty pooper style. Thomas is all disability doubters. Not satisfied with the lived experience of women, Thomas needs to witness Jesus' wounds for himself. He yearns to see, to touch, to understand, instead of just believing his friend's account. He doesn't have all the invasive questions of today's suspicious strangers, but he has the same big, doubting energy. He wants to make it make sense. But the thing about faith is, it's not always explainable, visible, or understandable. Disability doubters want to know what my disability is, why they have never heard of it, and how much concern they should show for it. They want me to explain what my body is so they can avoid it happening to them. They want my body to make sense. But the thing about disability is, it's not always explainable, visible, or understandable. A week later, Jesus appears again, inviting Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out and put your hand in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Jesus' body, a scarred, disabled body, is the example of the imperishable form transformed for the glory of God. This disabled body is the exemplar for how our own bodies will be transformed in the eschaton. Thomas seeks to understand what can't fully be explained. He wants to touch the scars and experience resurrection vicariously. Disability doubters also seek to understand what can't be explained. Perhaps instead of doubting, we should have faith that disability is valid and real. Perhaps instead of dismissing disability as ugly, we should perceive it as connected to the imperishable body of Christ, whose beautiful, disabling wounds are the marks of our healing. So when I tell you that I refuse to be ashamed of being disabled, it's because my disabled body displays the resurrected Christ. People are constantly asking me to explain the question mark that is my body. Why are you disabled? How did this happen? Have you tried eucalyptus oil? People are trying to slot me into their framework of limited understanding so that there can be a tidy reason for me to be this way. If I showed you my scars, would that make me more human to you? If I performed my trauma, would that make it more real to you? If I told you the name of my diagnosis, would that validate it for you? My body has a name, but it isn't a disorder or a disease or a disability. She is named One Who Wrestles with God, Child of the One True King, and Woman of Valor. And that is the only name you need to know. Blessed are those who don't understand and still welcome my body, scuda, spasms, sporadic symptoms and all. Blessed are those who do not need to read my mountain of medical records to care for me. Blessed are those who lean not on their own understanding, but trust my explanation as valid. Blessed are those who believe me. So number 3, third most popular tagline strangers say to me about being disabled: you're such an inspiration. My shivering arms rattle my surgical bracelets against the crepe paper on the exam table. Everything around me is pale: the walls, the medical cabinets, the fluorescent lighting. It's as if they've interpreted sterile environment as removing all color and warmth from the world. The radiologist, whose every sentence ends with bro, sets up the CT scan while I lay face down on the table, and they brand me with X's for the surgical sites. They're blue scrubs, the only color in the room. I am a mark, a target, an X, without a face or a name. My every identity marker has been removed or concealed so surgeons can focus on the problem that is my disabled body. I wonder to myself if they ever treat the wrong leg with how much Sharpie I am now wearing. I wonder how long it will take for the stain of their impatience to rub off. Make sure you remain perfectly still so the surgeons don't paralyze you, a nurse instructs me. They tell me not to make any jokes, not to ask any questions, not to disrupt them while they work. I must lie awake, yet stationary, conscious, yet silent, alert, yet relaxed, so they can track the surgical equipment inside my spine. I'm a zombie, but not one anyone buys a ticket to see. My main concern during the procedure is, what if I need to fart? Do I hold it in, push it out, and risk jolting the surgical equipment? Can they somehow see gas on the CT scan? Suddenly it dawns on me there were no flatulence facts in the medical literature they forced down my throat beforehand. I open my lips to ask, but I've already been censored for making a joke with bro surgeon, so I hold in my words and my farts until further notice. Do you have someone to drive you home? The Blue Scrubs ask one too many times, focused on how to dispose of me. They're not even done stabbing me in the back before they are ready to ditch me there on the frigid, crispy table. I count the number of times one of them tells me I'm brave or inspirational. I hit double digits before the big hand on the clock switches numbers. Every person who passes by my recovery room gapes at me like I'm a child trying to buy a toy with my own allowance for the first time. She's a tough cookie, I hear one of them whisper. She was brave in there. A nurse convinces her colleague. She's such an inspiration. Another agrees. Brave, strong, fighter, survivor, inspiration. All words used to describe me that afternoon. The identity envelops me the more people insist it is true. Like the red allergy bracelet around my wrist, screaming codeine to the distracted doctors, they might as well give me a bracelet that brands me brave. I don't want to be brave. I just want to be human. I am drained, swollen, and stiff. I'm not sure I have it in me to be brave, too. I know it is well-meaning, but the more that people insist that I am brave or inspirational, the more they cast me as a superhuman who is not in need of support and tender care. It feels more like a condemnation than a compliment, a spiritual bypassing of sorts, where they don't have to get involved in my liberation from ableism because I am strong enough to endure the pain of it. I am a fighter, but what if I don't have to be? There's a liberty that comes to being disabled. I have already endured what most people think is the worst case scenario. And most days, I am still kicking. I think about all my body has taught me, how I have learned to live outside of clocks and calendars, how I have learned to value myself, not as a resume of accomplishments, but as someone with worth, simply because I radiate God's image to an unsuspecting world. I think about how I have survived over and over and over again through medical trauma and housing discrimination, spiritual abuse, academic ableism, supermarket lawsuits, through people dismissing my pain. I am willing to take on Goliaths, hello medical industrial complex, because they do not scare me. They have already subjected me to their engulfing procedures and burning tests, but I am fireproof. I am a new creation, one that has been forged by fire, anguish, and courage. But some days, I would like to enter the world without my fireproof armor. I would like to live in a world where my bravery is not the price of admission, where I get to be myself, full of moxie and mess-ups, sarcasm and snarky quips, where never taking myself too seriously to be silly. I would like to live in a world where knowing silence is expected over the fickle comfort of platitudes, where strength isn't determined by how much pain you can endure before you break, where compassion and justice are more important than the bravery that only develops in their absence. I would like to be a full human and not just an idea. I would like to be me. How's everyone doing? You still with me? All right, number 2, Second most popular tagline strangers say to me about being disabled, "You'll be healed in heaven." The woman next to me is sobbing. The man across the aisle is jumping up and down as if he's about to go a few rounds in a boxing ring, despite his ripped skinny jeans. No one dares to make eye contact with me, but everyone in the congregation glances my way, making sure I hear the promises the lyrics hold for me. We're at the part of the song that exclaims there'll be no lame in heaven because in Jesus' presence we'll finally be healed and whole. Non-disabled folks couldn't be happier. It's a sea of buffalo plaid arms raised high in the air. Never mind that I don't feel broken or incomplete. Everyone else is too wrapped up in my erasure to notice. Everyone's so sure I'll be healed in heaven. Do you realize that Jesus' body is the only one that isn't perfect in heaven? The preacher starts. I'm not sure what qualifies him to make such a proclamation. Has he been to heaven? What is a perfect body anyway? But no one else seems to question it. Most folks in the crimson-backed pews cheer for this claim, as if someone's just announced that we're each going home with a brand new Mercedes. Instead of Oprah shouting, "You get a car," it's a preacher screeching, "You get a perfect body, and you get a perfect body, and you get a perfect body," to each of us in turn, as if the lack of perfect bodies is the predominant thing wrong with our current world. I'd be more excited that no one hungers or thirsts in new creation, especially since in our wealthy nation, 1 in 6 children don't know where their next meal comes from. But I guess my disabled body would be the focus of your praise if you were trying to distract yourself from doing something about poverty. We have enough food to prevent people dying from hunger. We just don't want to share it. One thing the preacher said that resonates with me: Jesus triumphed over death and retained the scars of crucifixion. God is disabled, and who's to say we will be any different? Driving home from the service, the palm fronds pass by in a blur as I wonder to myself, not for the first time, what church will be like if pastors understood God in the way that I do, as disabled. What if we could imagine mobility devices as similar to the one God uses to reign? When Daniel visits the clouds of heaven, he describes, "The throne was fiery flames and its wheels burning fire." A chair with wheels sounds a lot like a wheelchair to me, and one that gives new meaning to burning rubber. Maybe that's something we should sing about. Cue the swelling acoustic guitar music. Conveniently, the animated chorus forgets that God's throne is a fiery wheelchair when they buzz about heaven. I'm told this is a metaphor, not to take things so literally, but if anyone had bothered to ask me, they would know that when I picture an idyllic world, I picture ramps. How else would my upgraded, flaming wheelchair get around? Turns out it's not just me and Daniel picturing God in a wheelchair. Ezekiel describes God as a radiant fire with a massive mobility device that is lifted by 4 angels with fused legs and colossal wheels. The wheels encase wheels that glisten like topaz. God uses a fiery, shimmering, turquoise wheelchair to get around, and so should I. My wheels liberate me and allow me to operate in tandem with my mobility scooter, Diana. Her tires grip the pavement, absorbing the shock waves that my legs would otherwise have to endure. I lean into her ever so slightly as we go around a corner, like water gently caressing the riverbank as it flows. I feel the texture of the earth, the rhythm of the cement. I hear the symphony of vibrations as we drift from concrete to cobblestone. My physicality does not stop at the tip of my toes or the crown of my head. It extends to my cobalt chair, able to transport me to new worlds. Just like Ezekiel's vision, I am fused with these wheels that are my ticket to freedom. I am body, wheel, and fire. So finally, number 1, the most popular tagline strangers say to me about being disabled: "I'd rather die than be disabled." I'd kill myself if I had what you have, this pastor laments, like he's trying to commiserate. I've heard some version of this accolade for much of my life with all the comfort of a porcupine's cuddle. How can praise feel so prickly? What is a kind response to this? Thank you? I'm sorry? It's never not weird to receive, as if my very existence is a tragedy. No one dreams of their future including disability until it does. Amidst the baby shower fantasies, most parents don't imagine canes and crutches for their little bundles of joy. Disability is not high on the what you want to be when you grow up list. People's 5-year plans generally don't include becoming disabled. But perhaps they should. Not only because we represent 26% of the US population and 15% of the global population, or because you may join us one day. We're the only marginalized group that you can join at any time. That's how inclusive we are. By either age or accident, you may become disabled. If you live long enough, you will likely join us. But we should plan on including disabled folks because disability is a gift. I don't mean this in a feel-good, buddy movie kind of way that's just rebranding toxic positivity. The truth is that being disabled is hard, beautiful, heartbreaking, illuminating, full of loss and full of life. I'm grateful to be disabled, and yet I wouldn't wish it on anyone. My body is a menace and a marvel. I'm proud to be disabled, but it's not the sum total of who I am. The hardest part about being disabled isn't the pain, it's the people. It's trying to explain. It's asking people to rethink all of their assumptions about bodies in the Target parking lot. It's being bombarded with slurs every day in songs and on TV that no one seems to think are a big deal. It's getting up the courage to share my pain with someone only for it to be dismissed by comparison. No, my disability isn't like that time you broke your ankle in 3rd grade. It's being told that my husband is a saint for putting up with my disability, as if the sole purpose of our vows are for me to trap him into staying with me. It's being told that people would rather die than live in your body. The hardest part isn't the pain, it's the people. But I hope that one day it will be the pain. When I say that disability is a gift, it is not from a place of pretend that erases the pain. It's from the heavy and hard truth that life is beautiful and messy and vibrant if we let it be. It's from the hard-won, lived experience that disability is a gift, not just in my life, but in yours. You might not know it, but you are likely already benefiting from the innovation of disability culture. Everything from the electric toothbrush, to texting, to the touchscreen, to the Snuggie, to the potato peeler was created by and for disabled people. These assistive technologies, these facets of our everyday life that we can no longer imagine living without, exist because of the innovation of disability. We are uniquely creative because we live in a world that is not built for our body-minds. Imagine what else we could create together. Imagine how you could benefit from welcoming disability as a gift, a creative force, a radiant way of life. We already have a category for how beneficial and beautiful disability can be in nature. We just don't apply it to humans. No one mocks sharks for communicating non-verbally. The sound effect you think when you think shark is courtesy of Jaws, not nature. No one claims kangaroos are feeble because they cannot walk backwards. Their hoppity-boppity gait is delightful. No one thinks that lions are lazy or have chronic fatigue syndrome because they languish most hours of the day. They are fast and fierce. They just act more like us spoonies, and they know how to rest. The ostrich is not weaker than the robin because it cannot fly. We do not mock the turtle because it's born deaf, or elephants because they are born blind. Consider the penguin. Our tuxedo-wearing friends waddle, feet turned outward, shuffling from side to side. It's easy to think that their gait is clunky, silly even, when compared to humans' vertical stride. Penguins' short steps trundle their stubby legs forward incrementally, yet their walk is far more efficient than the human gait. Penguins have the highest energy recovery rate of any terrestrial animal. This simply means they retain their energy moving from one stride to the next. Humans fall forward with each step, allowing gravity to sludge our bodies along. But the ever-efficient penguin rocks from side to side, swaying in a way that preserves their energy for much longer. What's more, this is the safest way to move on slippery surfaces because it lowers the center of gravity. Turns out we should all do the penguin shuffle when traversing icy terrain. No tuxedo required. What if when we pictured the penguin, we didn't think of a funky shuffle, but a safer, more resourceful way to move? What if instead of mocking these dapper birds, we learned from them? What if we considered the ways an irregular gait might improve our lives? What if we invited disability to teach us something instead of assuming that non-disabled bodies are perfect and complete? We don't experience the remainder of nature in this way. It is only for human bodies that we have developed a hierarchy of worth. Crooked, the whitecoats say. My leg is crooked, my alignment is off. But little in nature is straight. Creation is jagged. The bumpy trunks of redwoods, the snaking branches of elm trees, the ragged edges of maple leaves. Nature is delightfully crooked. God's canvas of creation is wild, unruly, and exquisitely messy. Or to put it the way Paul does, God's invisible qualities are clearly seen throughout the creation of the world. Creation, in all its gunk and grit, displays the eternal power and divine nature of God to us, and it is delightfully crooked. Or we might say, it is delightfully disabled. Throughout the community of creation, we value the biodiversity that disability brings. It's time we start recognizing this in our disabled human neighbors. My disabled body is so rare that science is still discovering the depths that she contains. My nerves burn like fire, but fire is what enriches the seeds of the redwoods so the entire forest can flourish. My spasms jerk my body, but they are as effervescent as lightning bolts, illuminating the stormy sky. My leg is as cold as ice from lack of circulation, but ice is what synchronizes the ocean's tide. My disabled body is fearfully and wonderfully made. I am not the before picture in a prayer makeover or the symbol of sin used to guilt anyone else into repenting. My disabled body is pure, holy, set free, capable, and meaningful to the kingdom. My disabled body is made in the image of the one who put the stars in their place, told the ocean where to stop, and designed delightfully messy and crooked community of creation. My body, my disabled body, is composed of the same stuff as the stars. And it's time for the world and the church to notice our shine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. We're so glad to have you here.
Thanks.
My name is Mary Halst. I serve as the university pastor here at Calvin. I introduced myself as the president yesterday. That's why I'm saying that, yeah.
I wondered why that was funny that you were a pastor.
Yeah. It's an inside joke with everyone who was here yesterday. Amy will be signing her book, which I strongly recommend, afterwards, outside. In the book, after every chapter, you have great conversation questions, and then you have top 10 lists, which are funny. I think this is, I haven't read a ton, maybe Professor Timpey has read more, and I'm sure he has on disability stuff, but this is the funniest book on the church and disability I've ever read.
Thanks. That
Yeah.
should be on the back cover.
That should be on the
Yeah.
back cover. Like, it's just, you have a great wit, it's really funny, and I think that lowers anybody's defenses who may kind of wonder about some of the things. So let's start by talking a bit about theology. And in the book, you dwell a lot in this idea of the disabled God. What resistance have you gotten to that idea, and how do you respond to it?
What makes you think I've gotten any resistance? People love learning God is disabled. I have gotten a lot of resistance to that because I think people want God to be perfect and complete. And there's some smuggled in assumptions there that disabled folks are not complete or not whole. And my response to that is just one of graciousness and hopefully of loving our neighbors. But I also invite people to really think about why that makes them uncomfortable. What is it about disabled folks that makes people think that that's somehow incompatible with God? And then to go from there to think about how that means we might be treating our disabled neighbors in our congregations and communities.
So we know that there are challenges in church communities. We know that the ADA, for many reasons that are perplexing, didn't really apply in some ways to churches. We know, I think any of us who've spent any time on a scooter trying to get through old churches understands, like, these buildings were not at all built for anybody with mobility issues, let alone sight or hearing. But let's talk about what positive experiences have you seen in churches? Where have you been in worship or been to a congregation where you're like, oh, these people are doing something right? When have you, and what could we imitate from those places?
Yeah, I have been really grateful for the folks who have been willing to listen and to learn, who I've been in community with. I have been in a number of different book studies on disability books or disability theology in various churches I've been a part of, or groups that have been formed as a way to think about what is the experience of disabled folks in church. And so that has been really encouraging and warming to me, that people want to learn and want to listen. I think always goes further to me than people knowing the right thing to say. None of us get it right all the time, so people's willingness to grow and learn together, I think, means the world.
Has there been an experience in worship that surprised you? Like, oh, these people have really thought about this, and I can see that in...
Yeah, I remember one time in communion where, we're talking about this is my body broken for you, and that being connected really explicitly to a disabled experience, and that being a moment that spoke deeply to me and really resonated with the way that the world often experiences my body as broken, and thinking about how that connects to that co-suffering Christ.
Yes. You also write and talk about invisible disability. And so sometimes your disease presents and you're able to move a little easier through the world, and then you get the people who doubt it. But there are many people who have completely invisible disabilities. Some of our students in our Ready for Life programs, invisible disability. So what's just a good way to move through the world without being an idiot, I think, is a good question around kindness and compassion. You said that she had this great line this morning. You were talking about teaching Shakespeare, which is actually her job, and not talking about disability. But yes. And you said, I teach compassion, and I use Shakespeare. And I thought that was beautiful. So how can we cultivate more compassion and just understand that there are people who are disabled that we may not be able to see that they are?
Yeah. I give that number 26% a lot because I think that's surprising to people. I think generally people assume that the number is lower. And I give that number so that we can start to form an imagination for that means in every room, 1 in 4 people that we're with are disabled, whether that is apparent to us or not. So I think the first step is acknowledging that disabled people are in every space that we are engaging with and making sure that we are thinking about access needs and how to create an inclusive community that meets the access needs of everyone in the room.
One of our listeners asked the question, could you expand a bit more on your use of the term body-mind?
Yes. Body-mind is a disability community term that really invites us to think about how our bodies and our minds are connected and they're not separated from one another. So I think a lot of times we like to tease those out as though we exist as brains on sticks somewhere, and they're all connected. And this allows us to think about how our engagement with our bodies and with our minds is all interactive and supporting one another. I use that also as a way to think about how when we're talking about theology, that has to include our lived experience and not just what we think about God, but what we experience and how we engage with God in our communities.
Yep. One of our students asked, what's your experience been like at Calvin, and what can we do better?
That's a great question. I haven't been here long enough to really share many stories about Calvin. Maybe if I come back, that will be something, but I have really only been here last night and this morning, and everyone has been really lovely and welcoming, so yes, would recommend.
It's good to know, good to know. One of the things that was spoken about in class this morning, one of the students said in her New Testament class, the professor gave a theory that Paul was disabled, which is why he needed a scribe, which is why he talks about weakness and strength and weakness. Talk about that approach to Pauline letters. I know this isn't your area, I know Shakespeare is your area, but have you heard that before, and is that animating for how you experience Scripture?
Absolutely. That thorn in the flesh is a passage that I really connect with, and this idea of God's power and grace being made manifest in our disabilities and in our bodies. What's really interesting to me is that so often when we talk about Scripture, we just erase the stories that connect to disability. So it's interesting that we don't really think of Paul as disabled, or Jacob, or Isaac, or many of these folks that we read about and learn about God through their experiences, and so many of them are disabled. And I think one of the things I hope to do in the book is to invite people into a discussion about how so much of the work that God chooses to do with humanity is with disabled folks, and what that can teach us about what it means to be human.
In your book, you talk about the difference between curing and healing. Would you talk more about that?
Yeah, curing is a physical process. It's usually fairly rapid. It's what most of us go to the doctor for. It involves restoring our bodies to a state that eliminates disease, basically. But healing is messy and complicated and much richer and deeper. And it's a sociocultural process. It's a process of restoring to wellness and to community. So if you think about if you've ever had a surgery yourself or journeyed alongside someone in any type of surgery recovery, the physical curing process is generally a lot quicker than the time it takes to heal, to really think about moving on from or dealing with the aftermath of that surgery. And that's just one micro example of the difference between curing and healing. And I give that in the book as a way of thinking about how many of these passages that we see Jesus interact with disabled folks, that we usually talk about healing, there is a healing happening there that's rich and that's something deeper, but we kind of reduce it to curing. And I think what's happening in those moments where people are coming up to me and trying to pray away my disability is that they're hoping to help, they're hoping to support me, they're hoping to heal, but they're really reducing all of that to just eliminating disability. And so I'm asking for people to think about, can we as a community commit to healing? It takes so much more time and so much more patience and messiness, but I think it's worth all of the time and mess to get there together as a community, because I think it would allow for all of us to flourish.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the many interesting stories about Jesus and his healing is in the man born blind in John 9, of course. And Jesus does this profound disconnection between sin and disability. Who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus is like, well, neither. And as I'm hearing you speak, both this morning with the class and reading the book, could you expound more on the idea? I wonder that when people approach you, are they still making that connection? That there's some deep sin that happened in you or your parents, and we can fix that. Talk about the connection between perceptions of sin and healing.
Yeah, I've heard that quite a lot, both explicitly and and less directly. So folks say to me a lot, if you stopped sinning, you would be healed. Or
Wow.
what sin in your life is preventing you from running? Well,
Wow.
I mean, I can name a few. It's just what do you say in that moment? And I think most of us, I hope, because everyone here seems very lovely, I think most of us don't say that part out loud, but many of us still assume that disability and sin are connected, even in the way that we talk about heaven and new creation and the restoration of what that might be for each of us and the complexity of that. And I think part of what my body is doing in those moments with people when people encounter me is it's really asking for folks to re-examine so many of their assumptions about sin and disability. And Jesus just says, nope, that's not it. So I think John 9 is such an important passage for me for many reasons, but one of them is because I think Jesus makes it very clear that this idea that the man born blind or his parents have sinned and that has resulted in his disability is something that Jesus directly calls out.
Mm-hmm. One of the things Jesus does as well is he asks people. He doesn't assume that what they're coming to him for is healing. Now, we may read the story and be like, well, the man's blind, Jesus, it's kind of obvious. But he's really intentional. What do you want me to do for you? Mm-hmm. And he allows the person to name their need, which could be heal me. It could be, I'm not getting along with my brother. What are good questions people ask you? What are helpful questions that come your way?
Yeah, I love that Jesus asks people. I think, it won't surprise anyone, but I think Jesus gets it, I think that Jesus has such compassion. And sometimes we think we have that compassion when we're trying to help and when we have good intentions, but we can sometimes still be doing harm, as many of my stories today and in the book make plain. Helpful questions are things like, how can I support you? What help do you need? How can I be of assistance? And then allowing for me to share that. Sometimes when I'm using a manual wheelchair, people will just push me from one side of the room to the other without asking if I want to be moved, as though I'm a furniture object, right? So really asking if people need help or if they want support is helpful. I think another helpful thing is to really listen well when someone invites you into a more compassionate and inclusive way. So I often ask people not to say lame, because I am lame, and I don't really like being everyone's punchline. And usually the response to that is, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or don't be sensitive, or it doesn't mean that. And instead, thinking about how can I, in this moment, stretch myself just a little bit to love my neighbor well enough.
One person is asking, the 26% of people who are disabled, what does that include?
Yeah, that's a good question. It includes both apparent and non-apparent disabilities. It includes physical, mobility disabilities, blindness, deaf and deaf culture, low vision. It also includes different types of chronic illness and chronic pain. And I think that we will increasingly see these numbers go up the more that people become aware that they too have access needs, and they too want those access needs to be met.
And now a question that 2 of our students had that has to do with Shakespeare.
Uh-oh.
Why, it's very clear on your website you hate Hamlet. They would like to know, why do you hate Hamlet?
How much time do you have? I think a better question is, why does anyone like Hamlet? Hamlet hates women. He's mean to his girlfriend because she's a woman, says that very explicitly. He's mean to his mom. That's generally a red flag to me. He loves to whine about how hard his life is as a wealthy prince. And I think that usually whenever anyone learns that I teach Shakespeare or know something about Shakespeare, or they think that I do, they want to talk to me about Hamlet. And so I've just developed a little bit of a grudge towards him as a result, and he's become my nemesis.
Favorite Shakespeare play?
Definitely Titus Andronicus. That's the one, if you don't
Also
recall.
dark.
Yes, that's the one where at the end, this is a spoiler, but it's 400 years old. At the end, the main character kills his daughter's attackers, chops them up, puts them into a pie, and feeds it to their mum. What's not to love? So when I teach that, I always bring cherry pie to class. We have a great time.
It is a father defending his child, his female child, so that's
True.
we're a big fan.
Yeah, and to the point earlier, what I teach is Shakespeare, but what I think I actually teach is compassion. It's inviting people to think about how these stories resonate with us. And most of us probably haven't fed someone their kids in a pie. Most of us, I don't know. But all of us have experienced hate, anger, the desire for revenge. And the plays are really just a tool to get us to think about those human experiences and how they relate to race, disability, gender, and the human condition.
Well, thank you for helping us to continue to learn compassion. Let's thank Amy for her presentation.
Thank you.
Amy will be signing books in the lobby, and we will see you back here on Monday.